You've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy.
Yeah, you better shut your mouth or I'll have Kreutz shoot you in the butt again. Hi, welcome to A Captain's Log. I'm Lily Fox-Lim. Ambassador Kreutz should be returning shortly from an astrobiology convention on Kronos to determine if some of the asteroid fragments from the former Klingon moon Praxis could be salvaged with habitable temporary life support technology. Super cool. And he should be arriving now.
Lily,
right on time.
Hi. Yes, absolutely. It's been a bountiful blessings of amazing scientific research that I just got back from Kronos, one of your favorite Klingon planets,
Wow,
right?
It is.
So, we do have a bountiful blessing of believable character backstories and more that are in store in this upcoming episode of A Captain's Log, Broadcast TV's only Star Trek talk show. So I'm Bryan Kreutz, she's Lily Fox-Lim. You probably already introduced the show, right?
No, you should.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did.
All right. Well, we're going to do more than skim the outer rim within the Star Trek world of writing and story consulting with our guest today, David Mack.
Ooh, yes. David Mack has also written many Star Trek novels and comics.
Ah, yes.
Interestingly, in 2014, David Mack, David R. George III, and Kirsten Bayer approached Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci's KO Paper Products film production company, who by then had the license for television in Star Trek, soon to develop Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow, that was 2017 when Discovery first premiered on CBS All Access. But plus, Mack co-wrote 2 very solid Star Trek Deep Space Nine episodes. As of 2024, David Mack has been nominated for 11 Scribe Awards, and 10 nominations have been in the Best Novel Speculative category, Lily.
Well, let's not forget about our favorite animated comedy series, Lower Decks!
Yes! Oh, yes!
Mack has also extensively consulted as a story consultant on that show, plus another animated series that we were fortunate to discuss with Rylee Alazraqui last season, that being Star Trek Prodigy.
So cool, indeed. Now, story planning those big characters like Rylee's Rok-Tahk. So cool, right? It's a big part of David Mack, and he really has to fulfill that. Now, Star Trek Prodigy show creators Kevin and Dan Hagman had a vision for what they wanted the series to be with Star Trek Prodigy, but our guest David Mack was to boldly go by guiding them through the vast Star Trek universe, offering insights and doing deep dive research, right? Now, plus, Mack's involvement in Prodigy's first season extended from the early stages of the amazing animated series evolution through incorporating species like your favorite, the familiar Vulcans, right? Also, they had Medusans, Brikarian, aka the Brikar, all the way through to new species like Gwendala's Valnakat species.
Ooh, the Valnakat.
So cool.
Yes, on Star Trek Prodigy, there's so much that goes into the character concepts, like the different species, character development, character origins, and we'll delve deeper into that analysis with questions for David Mack.
Delve
Very
deeper.
shortly.
Yes.
Delve deeply. But first, we have a few news items to trek down memory lane, BK, don't
We do indeed. Always some really cool news stories we have here on A Captain's Log.
Over to the news.
Yes,
Here
so
we go.
Just really quick news. I did hear recently that Star Trek Season 3 of Strange New Worlds still actually doesn't have a release date, but we do know it will be released here in 2025 on where else? Paramount Plus. So please keep your subscriptions to Paramount Plus for more new Star Trek, and please rewatch Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, all these amazing shows that are out there for you exclusively on that app. So really, I think that's all the time we have for news today.
Oh, no, but I have one more.
Oh, you do?
Did you see that they released 2 of the cast members for the audio-only series about Khan?
Oh, no! I've been waiting on that series. Are you kidding me?
Yes,
Who are they? Oh, this is so cool.
Oh, no.
It's a surprise.
Yeah, it's a
okay.
surprise.
All right, it's a surprise. Oh, my gosh. You know, that series was Nicholas Myers, right? Nicholas Myers, the guy that's behind that. He did Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, the greatest Star Trek movie, 1982 feature film. What? Okay, so we got to get to the questions, right? But we got to go to a break really quick first, don't we? Yeah, before we bring David Mack in. We have to. We got to go to a break.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
And
All right.
Are we going to introduce him, or we're just going to ask him questions?
We'll ask him questions after the break, right?
Okay.
Yeah, because we have a lot of good Star Trek questions to ask David Mack. Back in a moment here on a Captain's Log.
A Captain's Log returns in a moment.
Hey, welcome back to the Captain's Log, Star Trek's and broadcast television's only series talking about Star Trek in these great biopic interviews. I'm Brian Kreutz, this is Lily Fox-Lim.
And we're here with David Mack today. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Oh, David Mack is awesome, right? He is literally, on the phone call I had in the pre-interview, the most knowledgeable person I have ever met that knows about Star Trek. This is David Mack. He's amazing.
That's impressive coming from you.
No, it really is, and he's a New York Times best-selling author, as well as many other best-selling author awards and acclaims for David Mack.
Whoa. Okay, well, I'm too excited. Let's go to the let's ask him some
All right,
questions.
let's do it. Let's bring him in.
Okay. Hi, David. Thanks for being here.
So the first question, David, you attended New York University's Tisch School of the Arts as an undergraduate from the 1987 to 1991 era, majoring in film and television production and screenwriting. Can you talk about your start and how just a few years later you submitted early spec script submissions to Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine? What?
That's so cool.
Yes.
I actually started submitting the spec scripts while I was still in college. I began watching Next Generation because it premiered as I started film school in fall of '87. And they began their open door policy of script submissions starting around the second season, 1988. I figured I'm in film school, I'm being trained to do this anyway, why not take a stab at it? So I started writing spec scripts and, having my friends do cold reads of them with me. And I started sending them in. And quickly began, well, not quickly, it takes a long time to get a reply from these guys, but over the next few years, I collected a number of rejections. And I never quite broke through at Next Gen, just didn't really solve the formula. And they had the same open door policy at Deep Space Nine, which I believe began in January of '93. So I continued to submit scripts to DS9, even though at that point I was out of college. I was working as an editor at various types of magazines. I was also working as a freelance journalist. I was writing articles for magazines as a freelancer. I was working as a beat reporter at one point, covering Crime Beat here in New York City. Did lots of sort of just weird, odd writing jobs like that, covered everything, wrote for whoever would buy words. But I was always writing the scripts and coming up with Star Trek stories in my own time, because that was the dream, but I had to pay the bills. And then what happened was I just kind of had a bit of luck. After a number of strikeouts with submitting the spec scripts to DS9, a friend of mine from college, my buddy Glenn Howman, introduced me to a guy named John Ordover. John, at that time, was the editor, or one of the editors, who was acquiring Star Trek novels for Simon & Schuster through their Pocket Books imprint. And John, also a big Star Trek fan, as one of the editors, he had access to the producers. He had an open invitation to set up a phone pitch to pitch stories to the show whenever he felt like it. But he never took advantage of it for the simple reason that he wasn't trained in TV writing. He didn't really have a good sense, even though he would get the scripts each week, he didn't have much of a sense for how to compose a TV story, what constituted a TV story as opposed to a novel. And he also was not he hadn't been specifically trained in writing scripts. And he didn't know their particular process, which was the pitch session, the outline, the beat outline, which breaks it down with an act structure, followed by draft scripts, all within a period of about 2 to 3 weeks. So I had that training. What I didn't have was access. So he put me and John together, and it's like a Reese's peanut butter cup. Peanut butter has met chocolate. And that worked out. But we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. So we decided, okay, let's make sure we know what we're doing, make sure we're a good writing team, that our strengths and our styles match up. And let's put ourselves through the paces. I said, I know the deadline, which is, you come up with your story pitch, and if they like the pitch and your outline, you do the beat sheet, you do the breakdown. So from the point where you settle on the breakdown, which is, this is the cold open, this is what happens before the opening credits, this is your out to commercial, this is the scenes in Act 1, here's your next out to commercial. I said, once you've locked that beat outline down with the writer's room, You have 2 weeks from that moment to turn in a first draft teleplay of about 52 to 58 pages. Our first phone meeting was with Jeri Taylor at Voyager, and we pitched Jeri some ideas, one of which she really liked and said she wanted to buy. And we said, great, very exciting. And so we got off that first phone call with our first sale. 1 call, 1 sale. Not bad. And then a few weeks later, we had our next call with the Deep Space Nine guys. And our first pitch doesn't quite hit. Second one doesn't quite hit. Third pitch, Starship Down. They said, we love it. Sold. What else you got? So here we are. We've just been told we've made a sale. We're being told, what else you got?
Now, David, you're also a freelance writer. The novel writing process at Pocket Books is interesting, I'm sure. Are you told to write a specific type of Star Trek idea, or are you going to write an idea for Pocket Books to buy, or is how does the freelance part of writing work? Like, do you have a good story idea and that's something you pitch for a book or novel? Or can you just tell us about your days in the 1990s that eventually led you to John Vornholt's novel, The Genesis Wave, book 1, with your contributions?
I wrote a chapter of that book, and those are 2 very separate questions. I'll take them in chronological order. One of the things that happened was that after John and I made the breakthrough writing for TV, there was editorial scut work, as they used to call it, in the Pocket Books office, in the Star Trek Books office. They would get lots of unsolicited manuscripts that would come in from would-be writers, and it was usually the job of the editors to read those manuscripts and find a reason to reject them. But every now and then, when the stacks would get tall enough, they would hire a freelancer, someone like me, to come in and take them, usually, and they would pay me almost by the pound, is how it worked out. And I would take these stacks of manuscripts and I would just go through them. And my job was to read enough of each one, not the whole manuscript, read enough of it to come up with a plausible reason why it should either go forward to an editor or into the rejection bin. And then write a quick memo detailing that, name of author, name of manuscript, date received, date read, conclusions, notes, whatever, recommendation. And I would get paid, to basically crush people's dreams. So this is what I did. And also my other responsibilities as an assistant on a freelance basis, because I was also working full time during all of this, was to write reference materials for the working Star Trek authors of that period, who were people like Michael Jan Friedman, Peter David, John Vornholt, Shane DeWeese, Bob Greenberger, Howard Weinstein, John Betancourt, and just starting around that time was Keith R.A. DeCandido, who was breaking in around that time. But for instance, I got hired to write for Peter David a reference guide to his New Frontier novels, which were groundbreaking. He basically proved that there was a market for Star Trek novels about original literary characters that were not based on a TV show. He borrowed some characters from the TV shows, but he created his own sort of niche version of the Trek universe with his unique style, his unique voice. And the people, the powers that be, were really sort of on the fence. They didn't know if this was going to work. They were like, really, it's not based on one of the shows. Who's going to buy that? And then it became a runaway hit. And they were like, so apparently it's the universe that's popular and not just the show. And what happened with the Vornholt thing, John Vornholt was running late for a variety of reasons, family stuff usually. He turned in his manuscript, and it's about 5,000 words short of what production considers a publishable length. It needs to have about 5,000 words at it, and we need it by Monday because we got to crash and take this to the printer. And they said, can you, and this was the editor's idea, John's idea, he said, can you write for me 5,000 words in the style of a classified Starfleet internal report about the Genesis device that fits John's narrative? And I thought about it for a second, and I went, yes, I can do that. He said, can you have it done by Monday? I said, of course I can have it done by Monday. I had no idea whether I could have it done by Monday, but you always say yes when offered paying work.
Nice, fascinating. Now, David, your first direct-to-paperback novels were a Star Trek The Next Generation duology called A Time to Kill and A Time to Heal. Can you talk about this and how it came about for you? Also, tell us about your favorite Star Trek novel or book that you wrote or perhaps co-wrote.
Yeah, trying to pick from 30 years worth of work. But we'll start with Kill and Heal. As you said, those were my first 2 direct to paperback, and they were back to back. They came out in successive months, August and I believe September of 2004, right before the 2004 election. And the way those came about was in 2003, shortly after Wildfire, my first sort of short ebook novel. It was done as two novellas, but if you put them together, they equal one short novel. It came out, it got great reviews, it sold really well, it surprised a lot of readers, and it surprised the editors. And the editors said, okay, let's keep this guy in mind. And what happened was they had this planned 9-book, actually started as a 12-book event. They were going to do this thing a time 2 with all these titles pulled from Ecclesiastes in pairs, a time to sow, a time to harvest, et cetera, et cetera. Originally, it was going to be 12 books. And then for a variety of reasons, economic, marketing, et cetera, it got scaled down to 9. And so they were going to have 4 duologies, and then Keith DeCandida was going to wrap it up with a single epic volume, A Time for War, A Time for Peace. And I guess some creative issues happened between the editors and some of the writers who had been tapped for the gig. I was also led to believe at one point there might have been contract negotiations that broke down over either issues of money or maybe issues of time. I'm not really sure which, but at least one of the writers, maybe 2, who were originally part of the series plan dropped out really kind of close to, the wire, like, at a point where it's like, can we possibly get anyone to replace them who can come up with new stories? Because they can't just take their work and hand it to somebody else and say, can you write their story? The other problem that I had at this point was that even though Wildfire had gone over pretty well, I was still an unknown quantity to the licensing department, who have to approve, the Star Trek licensing department at CBS has to approve all these stories. They approve them twice, once at outline and then again at manuscript. And if they see something that makes them go, this doesn't quite feel right, this doesn't feel like Star Trek, we think this could be problematic, you get pushback, especially if you don't have a working relationship with them yet, as I did not at that time. And so I kept getting all this pushback on my outline. They were worried about this, they were worried about that, this didn't feel right. And I had to try and come up with canon justifications for every single thing I was trying to do. Granted, I made my life difficult because what Kill and Heal actually are, if you look at them and you consider them in the context of when they were written, they are a very pointed commentary and critique of the 2003 U.S. invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq, which I thought was a badly mishandled affair from the very beginning. And so it's this story translated into the Star Trek universe of basically a badly conceived, political mess creates the need for this conquest, this active conquest in Time to Kill, which is very sort of Tom Clancy-esque, very fast, very action-oriented, very much an action thriller with some spy stuff going on around the edges. So it's got one type of feel. And then A Time to Heal, the second book, is all about the long, painful slog of occupation, occupying a foreign country that doesn't want you there, or in this case, a foreign planet that doesn't want you there. There were some revisions that had to be made at manuscript, but in the end, they saw that I was able to bridge that divide, that I was able to find a way to tell the story I was going to tell, but without subverting the ideals of what Star Trek is and represents. And it was after that, like once I had sort of made that breakthrough and those books hit the USA Today list like that, suddenly I was a USA Today bestselling author. Once that happened, I was in the ranks. It's like, okay, you came up, you made an impossible deadline, you sold a story that nobody thought you could sell to CBS licensing, and you hit the bestseller list. Welcome to the club, kid. You're in. What do you got next? And I think I went right from that to being asked by Marco Palmieri to help co-create Vanguard. So it was like, I was just rolling from hit to hit to hit.
Okay, now the great young Ferengi character Nog seeks refuge in the Holosuite after coming back to Deep Space Nine. Vic Fontaine helps him to come to terms with his disability and becomes a motivational figure. Can you describe the collaborative writing process with John J. Ordover for the 7th season episode, It's Only a Paper Moon?
Well, that was a sort of a fun story of creation. I may have touched on it earlier, where we started with this pitch called Everyone Comes to Quarks, with a title inspired by Everyone Comes to Rix, which is the title of the play that inspired Casablanca. And we pitched it as a bottle show, which is how we sold a lot of stuff as freelancers back then. You were always trying to come up with a bottle show, which is a show that takes place only on the standing sets the show already has, pretty much relies only on their core cast, minimal guest stars, minimal effects. You try to keep it as focused as possible so that it can be shot quickly and for very little money. And they take the money they save on your episode and they use it to pay for their big special effects laden episodes that the staff writers get to write. And so this was how freelancers ingratiated themselves back in the 90s, is you would find ways to help them save money on yours so that they could spend money on theirs. So we had this idea, and it was sort of set up like an episode of Cheers, where all these different storylines were going to weave in and out of Quarks. And they would be tangentially related, like, Dax is on a series, Jadzia Dax is on a series of blind dates. Cisco and his son Jake are in the Holosuite replaying a classic World Series game from like a previous century. O'Brien and Bashir are having like a darts tournament of some kind. There's something else going on with somebody else. The workers are getting ready to strike. Replicators are failing. Oh, and the big premise behind it all was that there was a confluence, a weird once in like a century confluence of alien holidays all hitting at the same time, so that all of the other establishments on the station where you might go to eat or drink were closed. And the only place open for business is Quarks, because Ferengi don't believe in closing for holidays. Why would you lose profit? It's a holiday. And Quark has his own thing going on. In the midst of all this, on his busiest day of the year, he's also trying to do a black market deal. He's gotten his hands on this old Klingon artifact, and he has a buyer lined up for it who will pay handsomely. And the only thing that could possibly go wrong would be if a Klingon happened to recognize this artifact for what it was and shove it up, Quark's butt. Unfortunately for Quark, this is right after Worf has joined the cast. Worf comes in right before Quark is supposed to meet his contact to sell the artifact. Quark has got to get Worf out of the bar without Worf realizing that he's being shuffled out of the bar. He can't just throw him out. He's got to make Worf want to leave, but he can't let on why. So Worf comes in on his only 30-minute break of the day. He needs something to eat. He's hungry. He's hangry. They're going through every food item, and there's a reason why Quark can't serve it to him. And the more he tells Worf no, the angrier Worf gets, to the point where Worf is just about to lose his mind. And finally, Worf reaches across the counter, grabs Quark by the collar, says, "I want a bowl of gok. If I do not get gok, I will rip out your lungs." And Quark just goes, "One bowl of gok? Coming up. Well, put it in the back of the stack and we'll come back to it next season." And they did this for 3 years, because we pitched it before 4th season. And then finally, in 7th season, they'd come back and they said, "All right, well, it's gone through a number of permutations, been through a number of changes. But we're going to buy it. We're finally going to buy it, but we're going to be changing the title, and we're going to give you some notes, and you need to rewrite the outline." We said, "Okay." This is Ron Moore giving us all this by the phone. Ron says, "Okay, here's what it's going to be. It's going to be a story about Nog." We said, "Okay." And he's spending all his time in the Las Vegas Holosuite. We said, "Okay." And he's had his leg blown off in combat in a previous episode, Siege of AR-558. And he's come home, and he's got a prosthetic leg. And he's going through, some changes, and he won't come out of the Holosuite, and he's being a dick to everybody. We're like, "Okay, so why won't he come out of the Holosuite?" And I swear to God, Ron Moore, without a single break in his voice, said, "Well, how the hell do I know? It's your story." I'm like, "All right, okay." So Ron jumps this on us, says, "We need it back in like 2-3 days. Can you do it over the weekend?" We say, "Sure." I go away, and fortunately, or it's weird to say fortunately, a number of years before that, I had survived a pretty bad car accident, after which I had to learn to walk again. And so I had some familiarity with the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, and also what it is to sort of wake up and realize that an ability you took for granted is suddenly gone. I was lucky enough to get it back. Not everybody is, but I had enough of that familiarity with what he was going through. It's that moment as a young man where you realize, if they can blow off my leg today, they can blow my head off tomorrow.
This is not the first time you worked with John Ordover as a collaborative co-writer. Back in the 4th season episode Starship Down, we get to delve deep into the character psyche of many main characters on this great Deep Space Nine. For instance, Bashir and Jadzia are stuck in the Deep Space Nine turbo lift. We get to see a lot of exposition on their characters, and that runs deep.
It really does, yes. Yes, Lily, our great spin-off Next Generation characters in Deep Space Nine get to banter, it's Worf and O'Brien. They get some good scenes together. Love this. It was so cool. O'Brien's mentoring Worf as he's transitioning from his 7 years as Chief of Security on the Enterprise D into command operations on DS9 now, and learning how to deal with his subordinates.
Ooh, yeah, and then we get to see what makes Quark tick and how he has his own personal code of conduct to fleece his clientele. In this episode, Starship Down, Hannah played the great James Cromwell.
Oh, James Cromwell was so cool because he was in First Contact, right?
Yes.
Such a cool actor, right? Zephram Cochrane is who he played, right? But yeah, I mean, come on. It doesn't get any better than that, right?
Yeah, Jimmy C, as we call him.
You did the backwards Vulcan salute, Lord X style. I love it. Now, all of this is the meat and potatoes of the episode where David Mack and John J. Ordover reveal the deep revere that Kira, who we just interviewed not too long ago, Nana Visitor, has for her commanding officer. Now, this is the first time we really get to see and hear Kira proclaim, professing her faith without a doubt, that Sisko is the emissary. Pretty cool.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, in the season 4 Deep Space Nine episode Starship Down, the Dominion is punishing the Karema for being in business with the Federation. Sisko and the Defiant crew defend a Karema ship when it's attacked by the Jem'Hadar. And with a hunt for Red October flavor, wouldn't you say? This is the first episode that you wrote the story on with John J. Ordover. Part of Dax and Bashir and Kira and Sisko are all diving into the physique of the main cast. Sisko gets a concussion. Kira tells Sisko the farmer story to keep him awake. Just tell us your process for developing this story.
Yeah, we had started as a bottle pitch, but in terms of the special effects for the episode, it quickly got away from us. Even the stripped and pared down version that we see on TV with, where they have just the gas effects in the corridor, even that was, pricey. And then there's all the visual effect shots with the Karma ship, the Jem'Hadar vessels, the Defiant out in the gas giant atmosphere. It ended up costing a lot more than we thought a bottle episode was going to cost. The whole fun thing about Starship Down, it started out with just the simplest of things. I remember being in a car. John and I were driving somewhere in New York City in his car. He was driving, I'm in the passenger seat. And the night before, I had watched the classic German submarine film Das Boot. And so with this in my mind, I turn to John and I say, I want to sink the Defiant. He goes, all right, pitch me the story. And so I come up with, whatever reason Defiant is somewhere, mixes it up with the Jem'Hadar, gets shot down. Originally, my plan was they get shot down and they crash down on a water world, on an oceanic planet. And the Defiant sinks and it goes to the bottom. And it's in an environment it's not made for. It's not meant to be under crushing tons of water. It's meant for zero pressure vacuum. So this is a very bad place to find a starship. And we had all these notions that it was going to be this, and we were going to have flooding compartments and water pouring through bulkheads. And we had this great moment where Odo has to come down to, save the crew. He's the only one who can reach the ship because he says he'll go into his liquid form, pass through the water because he's denser than the water. He'll find damage in the hull and he'll flow inside. And the idea was he was going to flow into the ship with the flooding water and then reform. And they'll be like, why weren't you crushed? He says, I can't be crushed. I'm liquid. So it was going to be this sort of fun little stuff. We had all this stuff going on, and we sold the original pitch. And then when they were starting to break the outline down, and they wanted to do the the scene by scene. They said, we need to make some revisions to the outline before we do the scene by scene. We said, okay, what's going on? They said, well, we love this story. We'd love to shoot the story. And as soon as we have a spare $200 million, we'll shoot the story. But we can't afford to do this on a TV budget. At that time, they were shooting episodes of DS9 at that point for like under $1 million an episode. I mean, it's not like today where an episode of Strange New Worlds has a budget of about $11 to $12 million for 48 minutes. Back then, they had under $1 million. They were working on a shoestring, and special effects were not as developed as they are now. Water, also, to keep in mind, is one of the most dangerous and expensive things to work with on a movie set. There are few things you can work with that will damage equipment, hurt your personnel, and just basically get out of control faster than water. Water is a nightmare. And here we had a script full of flooding compartments, and they were like, no, we're going to have to do something. And of course, now we switch it to a gas giant atmosphere. And I do some research, and I have to tell them, I'm like, well, you understand that the atmosphere, even though it's a gas giant, the gas is under so much pressure because of the gravity and the sheer mass of the planet that it actually congeals into something like a super hot liquid metal. That's even going to be more difficult. They said, well, we'll just do gas. It'll just be some roiling gas. I'm getting more and more disappointed with the compromises that we're making in the effects as we go along. But I accept it because what are you going to do? They don't have $200 million. And I want the episode made. So I'm, all right, we'll do what we got to do. So we finally get, an outline approved, and they come up with this whole sort of disaster concept. We get brought in to do the break session. John and I fly out to LA, and we're in the writer's room for a couple of days, working with the writers with the dry erase board, plotting it out act by act, scene by scene, finding all the act outs, all the commercial breaks and whatever. And as we're working on it, they are asking us to do, like, suddenly they're coming up with these scenes out of the blue, and I begin to see how a writer's room actually functions. They're not just focused on this episode. They're trying to figure out how this episode links to the narrative threads of what they're doing for the rest of the season. And I'm listening as they're trying to get us to incorporate this element and that element and this element so that it will tie into and set up this thing they want to do 4 episodes down the line, and use this character that they want to set up 2 episodes prior. So they were asking us to put in this character named Tyler, who was supposed to be so important. And all the scenes that later got given to Worf were getting given to Tyler. And I didn't understand. I'm like, who the hell is Tyler? Why do we give a shit about Tyler? Shouldn't we be spending more time? They're like, no, trust us. You got to do Tyler. So we followed our instructions. We're given these scenes. We break the whole thing down. We get our working outline. John and I take our working outline, and as we've been trained to do, we go and we execute our teleplay based on the outline. It's not our job to second guess the writer producers who run the show. It's not our job to look at the outline we've been given and go, yeah, let's do something else. Let's change this. That's not our job. Our job is to execute a proper teleplay that matches that outline that we've been given. That's our job. So we do it. We execute that teleplay. We give them Tyler, all the Tyler they could possibly want. We give them their Tyler. And we turn the thing in. And it gets handed over to Renee Echevarria as the producer in charge of that episode. He's the one who has to handle it and shepherd it through the process in-house. We get CC'd on all of the revisions. This script went through, I think, something like, they put poor Renee through 5, maybe 6 rewrites, full rewrites, not just revisions, like page 1 to the end, rethinking this thing. They rethought it 5 times in like 3 weeks and made him write 5 scripts in 3 weeks, which is insane. And he finally came up with something that's pretty close to what they had at the end. I mean, we always had Hannock, but originally Hannock was female. They changed it to male, and we ended up with James Cromwell, which is awesome. But by the time we got done, I didn't really recognize a whole lot from our script, which is sort of funny to me. But, I was like, all right, but we got our credit, we got our money, and it hopefully would open the door. At the time, I was hoping that we would capitalize on that sale, and that, some of our future scheduled pitch calls would yield more sales. And I was hoping to eventually get into the room to get staff the way some of these other guys broke in as freelancers and then later got staff. And that just never happened. For some reason, John and I just never found the formula again. We never hit again. We couldn't get a pitch to take hold again, and we didn't know why. It was very frustrating. But it's just one of those things. There's nothing you can do about it.
This is a great character developing episode, simply put.
Yes, absolutely. Yikes. Now, we're just hitting our stride and warping forward with a great interview with David Mack here on A Captain's Log. Be sure to come back next week for part 2 with David Mack.
Yeah, that'll be a great one, too. He's so Trek knowledgeable. Bye for now.
Old friend, I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy.